Let's start with the Super Bowl, guys. What everybody's talking about beyond the weather is actually Peyton Manning and his legacy. And Mr. Wise, I'd ask you what a win, a second Super Bowl win for Mr. Manning would mean for his legacy.
I think it would get people off his back that he can't win the big one, or that he's not as clutch as, for instance, his brother, who's been very resourceful at the end of 2 Super Bowls. But I don't think – look, Dan Marino is thought of as one of the all-time top 5 quarterbacks. When I wrote a column a couple weeks ago saying I thought Tom Brady, his legacy was greater because he's done it in the most crucial moments, that doesn't mean that Peyton Manning is still not a top 5 all-time quarterback. I believe he is. But I do think – after the interception against the Saints in the Super Bowl, all the times that his team was 4 times now the number 1 seed and knocked out early, I think this gets some people off his back if he wins it again.
Mr. Steinberg.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you're being like subtle and truthful and stuff, you would say what happens in the game probably matters a little bit. You know, that Ravens game last year, I don't put that one on Peyton Manning's ledger. They gave up the
long
length
bomb.
of that bomb was.
Yeah.
Obviously, that game was not lost because of Peyton Manning. If he comes out and puts up 35 points and Seattle outscores him, that's a totally different story than if he throws a couple picks and can't beat the Seattle defense. So I think that it kind of depends. But in terms of like sports talk radio and bar debates and stuff, absolutely, one Super Bowl is a lot different than 2, I think. Like, I think the difference between 2 and 3 is a lot less than the difference between 1 and 2.
Jason, what's your take?
I mean, to me, it's a ridiculous conversation because you're talking about a guy who, it would be one thing if he had never won. Mm-hmm. Well, then I could see people making the argument, well, that this guy isn't clutch, that this guy can't, quote unquote, win the big one. But he won a Super Bowl in which he was the MVP. He's been a multiple time, I believe he'll win the MVP award this year, will be 5 or 6 times.
Something like that, 4 or 5.
You look at the records, you look at this. See, what people don't understand often about professional sports is because these guys are so great, some of them make it look easy, but the reality of it is when you look at the sustained excellence that he has been the primary reason for, you look at those Indianapolis Colts team year after year after year, not just getting to the playoffs, but winning their division. I mean, people used to rip the Atlanta Braves for only winning those division titles in 1 World Series. Well, if you're a Redskins fan, would you take winning the NFC East 10 of 12 years and winning 1 Super Bowl in that point? I mean, I just think people they always want to look for something to break people down with and say, well, this isn't good enough. The guy won a Super Bowl. He's been a multiple-time MVP. He's going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the game. Yes, if he wins another Super Bowl, it's another thing on his ledger. But to me, the guy has nothing left to accomplish.
I still think you got to win just because you're favored, only by a couple points, but you're favored against a great defense, and you were the story of the NFL this season. Peyton Manning was the story, the biggest story in the NFL this season. It taints his reputation in talk radio world. I don't think it taints his reputation in football thinking world.
Let me ask you this. You brought up Dan Marino. Dan Marino, I don't think you would find anyone who would question Dan Marino's credentials in terms of saying this guy is a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. He never won a Super Bowl.
You're right.
Never won one. Julius Erving, one of the greatest basketball players in history of the NBA, won 1 NBA championship.
How about your boy Durant, who you were going at the other day on Twitter?
Well,
what was that about?
That's totally off the rails.
Keep it on the rails.
It's actually, I think it's similar. I think people will not even allow him to be suggested in the same sentence as LeBron James
until he wins a title.
Well, and I don't know if John even wants to go down this road. But I was watching the Heat versus the Spurs, and I just tweeted out that, look, Kevin Durant is having a fabulous year. He's obviously a fabulous player. But there is no comparison between him and the guy in Miami. The guy in Miami can play point guards defensively, can play power forwards, can play wing players. He runs the offense for that team. He is the best, or one of the best on-ball defenders in the NBA, and he's one of the best help defenders in the NBA. The point I was trying to make is scoring sells, and with Russell Westbrook out right now, Kevin Durant has had to do more. But there is no comparison between him and the guy in Miami.
The reason I brought up in this discussion is because I think if Oklahoma City had won that series against Miami a couple of years ago, that the discussion would look a lot different. But they did, exactly, which is why the Manning thing matters.
But no,
sort of counters his argument about Manning.
Except Manning has a championship.
So once Durant gets it.
Well, but you make that, you're saying that.
Don't diss the Durantula. This is a DC sports show.
But my point
this is a DC sports show.
He went to Montrose Christian, right?
You did.
Yes,
Okay,
I did.
thank you. You know where that is, right?
Yes.
So my
You
point
know where
is,
Suitland is? That's right. Correct.
and I know we got to get off of this. Let me just say this time. You're comparing
Quickly.
apples and pineapples. Until he has a championship, you can't make that comparison.
I like apples and pineapple. You did bring up Marino, and quickly, Manning is now the fourth quarterback in the history of the NFL to have led the league in passing yards and touchdowns to reach the Super Bowl. 3 others before him, none of them have won the Super Bowl. Marino's one of them, Brady and Kurt Warner also.
Can I bring up a quick point?
Quickly.
Before Emmitt Smith and the Dallas Cowboys won the Super Bowl, no NFL rushing champion had ever won the Super Bowl. That type of stuff is irrelevant.
All right, it's
It
irrelevant.
only
All right,
matters
it's a
until the
great
first
point,
time
Jim.
someone does it.
Great point, Jerry.
Fair enough.